There has never been a more important time to move in a vegan direction. Whether you're ready to start, restart, or re-energize your vegan or plant-based practice, this podcast is for you. I'm Michelle Olander, life coach, vegan, ADHD matriarch, travel lover, and smoothie loather. And I know that it's the details that get in the way of your vegan journey. But I like to believe that the obstacle is always the way. So every week we meet here where I translate the tools of life coaching and Stoic philosophy. I bring you actionable tips, some laughs, interesting guests, and vegan ideas for everyone at any age. All to help you veg your best. Episode 294, The Human Cost of Farming Animals. The Transfarmation.org. Hey, my Veg Your Besties, it's Michelle. This episode will go out on April 21st, the day before Earth Day, which just so happens to be my wedding anniversary. And if things between now, when I'm recording this introduction, and Earth Day 2026 aren't too catastrophic, my husband and I will be in the UK this week, where we got engaged many, many moons ago. But as I'm recording this intro ahead of time, as I say, I want to, acknowledge out loud that the news has been very upsetting here in the United States, and for that reason, it's been upsetting around the world. So by the time you hear this, there may be very serious developments in the world, and potentially some good news too, though at the moment that sounds less likely. So recording this introduction today feels a little suspended in time. But if history is our teacher, it has always been awful somewhere. So the most important thing I think that we can do is to keep cycling back to the things that we can accomplish and the difference we can make. So today's conversation feels important because it's about what happens when a harmful system becomes normalized, when the suffering is hidden, and when the people carrying the burden are not the ones with the power. And also, when most of us are encouraged not to look too closely. Today I'm talking with Megan Hunter, who is joining us from the Transfarmation.org. Transfarmation, not formation. It's an organization that helps farmers transition out of factory farming and into other forms of agriculture that are more sustainable, more humane, and frankly, more livable. In this conversation, Megan will talk about the debt, the loss of autonomy, and the waste burden that so many contract farmers are carrying, and also about the very real alternatives some families are building. What I especially appreciate about this conversation today is it's not a simplistic story. It's not farmers here, vegan advocates over there. It's a story about systems, power, legacy, land stewardship, and what it might look like for farmers to have a real way out. So anyway, let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Megan Hunter to learn about the Transfarmation.org. Megan Hunter, Senior Program Specialist from the Transfarmation Project. That's Transfarmation Project. Welcome to Veg Your Best.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, I'm really glad to have someone of your background with your experience explain to us what the Transfarmation Project is. I was recently reminded of it from a really, really moving article in the Guardian newspaper. And I just was like, my listeners need to know all about this. So can you tell me, what is the Transfarmation Project?
Absolutely. So, Transformation, we work with farmers to solve the problems of factory farming. And for folks who aren't familiar, there are quite a few problems. I can touch on a handful of them, and most of them stem from the contracts that these farmers, primarily in chicken and pig farming, are trapped under. These contracts create a dynamic where their integrators can maximize their profits while pushing the cost of production onto farmers in rural communities. So, what this looks like is farmers often get trapped in a debt loop from their initial investments, meeting their integrators' requirements, as well as the upgrades that are often required before they ever pay off that initial debt. Farmers come to us from anywhere from over a couple 100,000 to over 1 million in debt from this system. So that's one of the big challenges and problems. Another is under these contracts, farmers don't really have control or own the animals that they're raising. So they have a loss of autonomy under this system. And the last one I want to touch on is the amount of waste that's produced in the system. That is a huge problem. There was an analysis of the most recent USDA's Census of Agriculture from 2022, and it highlighted that there are 24,000 factory farms in the US, and they produce 940 billion pounds of manure annually. And that's about twice as much sewage that is produced by the entire US population. So it's a pretty
Oh my
significant issue.
goodness.
Yeah.
Wait,
Yeah.
say that again. Twice as much?
Twice as much sewage produced by the entire US population.
Wow.
And what's even more wild than that is the waste management of this is placed on farmers themselves. And this really limits their ability to steward their land for the surrounding communities and the future generations that inherit it.
I heard something when I was looking into it. Like in my day, so I'm in my 60s. I remember even before my time, there was a documentary by Edward Murrow called Harvest of Shame, which was about the migrant farm workers and how they were basically indentured. Our food system could not function without them, and yet they could never get out from under the punishing, like they would bring them to a farm to work and they'd end up owing money for the transportation or the food that they were given to get there. Here in that was from the early 1960s. We're talking about a similar situation where a handful of large industrial food producers contract with people who own the land. And I read somewhere they basically at the end of the program, they own the land and they own that waste you're talking about, but they don't own the animals, they don't own the crops, the feed, the process. Explain to me what are our farmers thinking they're going to get when they contract with these big producers?
Well, a lot of farmers are just looking for a way to stay on their land, right? And so when these companies approach them, the contracts look agreeable to them and they enter into it. They don't always go in and say, oh, and then after you do this initial investment and meet our requirements, they don't always tell them, oh, we're going to turn around and ask you for more upgrades in order to maintain that contract. So there is a lack of transparency in them, which is what gets some farmers in the system.
And that's interesting. And I also heard that if they have a contract with one of these handful of enormous, you know, companies, then they can get uh, bank loans. That acts as so that's very tempting that the loans they need, if they are on their own, they may not get them. But if they have these contracts, they can do that to help save their family land and also to try to uh, make it productive.
Yeah, that's correct.
So this is it is, and you can just think about all these. We have this romance, which I think many of us think the animals are on these beautiful farms, these beautiful lands, tended by people who've done it for generations. And these families want to keep farming in some way, and they end up even more pressed than they were before. So enter the Transfarmation project.
Yeah, so we work with farmers to create solutions to those problems. And we do that by providing resources, we offer technical assistance, and we also offer grants that support farm transitions moving into specialty crop production. So for those who aren't familiar, specialty crops are really food grown directly for human consumption. Think specialty mushrooms like your lion's mane, your oyster mushrooms, leafy greens, herbs, fruits, and vegetables. So wide variety of what farmers can go into that type of production. We also work to amplify farmer voices and their stories. So that might be through media, policy, and research opportunities. And we really just exist to share how factory farming harms everyone, not just farmers, but the rural communities, consumers, the environment, and animals.
Mm. So for example, in the Guardian article, so you guys work with all kinds of animal farms. I had heard somebody talking about a sheep, a wool, primarily wool, but a sheep farm. There's the hog farm, which was the subject of the one in the Guardian, an Iowa hog farm. Are there any kinds of animal agriculture factory farms that you don't work with?
Yeah, so the Transformation Project primarily works with farmers who have farmed pigs and chickens at an industrial scale, primarily because the buildings and the situations that they're raised in are very similar as far as converting those facilities to grow something new. We have also worked with a handful of small dairy farmers that had maybe 100 to 200 dairy cows and converting their dairy parlors. We have not particularly worked with cattle, other than we did work with the Howley farm in Texas. They were able to repurpose their cattle pasture into a donkey sanctuary or a donkey rescue, which is really unique. But that was somewhat regionally limited, but depending on the nonprofit that they worked with for that rescue.
And I just want to touch one more time on this idea of farm families with farmland that's been generationally in the farm. I imagine nobody wants to be the generation that lost the family farm. And I also imagine the children, young people can't really work on many of these farms the way they could have maybe historically with the intensive what do we call them? The CAFOs, the intensive farm factory farming. Is that true that kids can't really be involved in that?
A lot of the farmers that we have worked with are actually the next generation. So they may have been raised on these farms as they were becoming these large confined animal feeding operations or factory farms. And so what's really interesting is they've seen what the experience and how their families may have been treated, and they're just not interested in following in the footsteps, even though they do want to carry on the farm, carry on the legacy, and carry on the stewardship. Many of them are motivated for those financial or economic reasons where they see their parents are trapped in this cycle of debt. A lot of them are also, there's an environmental stewardship component to it as well. So they're really seeking what else can we do at this farm that isn't harming the environment and that isn't harming ourselves and our financial situation.
All right. So when you come in to start working, and I assume there's only so many you guys can work with, so many farms you can work with per year currently. But when you do come in and start working with a farm, what's kind of the process? What is the order of operations in something like this?
Yeah, absolutely. So when farmers reach out to us, they kind of give us a rough idea of just what's going on with their farm, where they're currently at, what they're farming. And so a farm transition, when we work with them, it really just depends on what a farmer's individual goals and their capacity are. Again, we focus on helping farmers transition to specialty crop production. So if they want to transition to something else, that isn't really our niche. But it really depends on so farmers who are under this factory farming system, a lot of them have had to go off farm to either get another job if their contracts are terminated or to help service the existing debt they have from being in the system. And so that's a common goal we might see from these farmers is wanting to bring themselves or their family back onto the farm. So we're looking at what are your goals and then also what is your capacity? Do you have current farm operations outside of that might take up some of your time away from being able to transition? What do your finances look like outside of any grants you might be able to secure, any funding? Those are really going to dictate maybe the pace and the capacity of how quickly they're able to transition. But we do work with them and we see a general flow, and that is building out the initial space for production. So it's like, okay, what do you have on your farm that you can repurpose? Maybe that's a former chicken barn, a former hog barn, or maybe it's your former dairy parlor. We've had that as well. And how can we build that out or convert that into that space for production? Some farmers may not be able to go into that right away, so it might be another space on their farm. And with that small space that we're able to convert, or we go into small scale production. So let's try to grow something new. Maybe that's a specialty mushroom, and maybe that's, hydroponic lettuce, but really starting to grow a new crop, seeing how we feel about that, seeing if that works for us and if it makes sense for our goals and our capacity. And then from there, do we want to scale and diversify? Do we want to continue to grow hydroponically? Do we want to grow in the soil, or do we want to grow something differently using that same production system? Same thing if you're growing mushrooms, for example. Maybe you're growing lion's mane. Maybe you want to try oysters or another form as well. So it's that general flow of converting the space for small scale production, doing the small scale production, and then from there, scaling and diversifying into whatever your goals are.
So when I first am listening to you, I'm thinking, well, how can those crops bring in any kind of cash equivalents to what they were receiving from animal livestock? But it sounded like when I was doing the reading that most farmers don't really make very much money from these billions of animals that are going through our system.
Yeah, yeah. I can't remember the exact amount, but I know that both chicken farmers and pig farmers, as some of the most recent ag census data talked about, they made less than $10,000 of net farm income. So these farmers aren't making a lot after you consider all of the debt that they're paying off or servicing as part of these contracts or just in general. And I do know, at least for chicken farmers, the average amount that they get paid per chicken is about a quarter. So they're not really making as much as you would think, even given how big these facilities are and how many animals that they are raising.
Yeah, I remember as a kid, there was a chicken farm just down the street. I mean, this is a long time ago, and it was just chickens, and you could smell that truck coming. I mean, maybe a mile down the road, you could smell it if the wind was going in the right way. And it was just most manure didn't bother me, but the chicken, the chicken farm manure. And so in these intensive productions, people must have neighbors that are pushing back a little bit about the smell of factory chicken farming.
Yeah, the smell of chicken farming and also as well the smell of hog farming or pig farming. There's a really good documentary called The Smell of Money. One of the farmers that we've worked with is featured in that documentary, and they talk to especially the environmental racism that exists as part of where these farms are located and how the neighbors are farmed. But a lot of that waste from pig production goes into a lagoon, and that is then sprayed out on the fields in a lot of states, and specifically in North Carolina. This documentary touches on how that was affecting the neighbors and the environment surrounding that. So yeah, it is a major problem.
So these people are working so hard. They've got the difficult process of all these animals, which they must have, even if they're very hardened off to the concept of what's going on in the long run with these animals. These animals are suffering in the meantime during the process of their factory confinement. And and then they're kind of pariahs, many of them, given what's going on around their neighbors with the pollution, the smell, the noise, I imagine, in many cases. So, how do the farmers find out about you? How do they even start to believe, oh, there might be a uh, a different choice I could make here?
Yeah, and I'd love to just give a background on Transformation's story and how we came to be. I think that really kind
Yes.
of highlights on how farmers continue to find us as well. So Transformation really came out of the bravery of a former contract farmer named Craig Watts. He partnered with our founder, Leah Garces, and they whistle blew on the poultry industry. And this was because Craig saw a disconnect between the circumstances he was required to raise these chickens in versus how the companies were marketing them to consumers. And so Craig's whistleblowing on the conditions the chickens are raised in is known as confined animal feeding operations, as we've touched on. And this drew attention from national media, including the New York Times in 2014. His story resonated really widely, and it really exposed how contract farmers are beholden to these large companies that we refer to as integrators, and how these farmers risk retaliation when they speak out for food system reform or for system reform. Ever since Craig made that national news, Transformation continues to hear from farmers for a couple of reasons. It's farmers have had their contracts terminated unexpectedly by their integrators, or they've been edged out of production. We see that with a lot of smaller dairy farmers, or they're seeking to exit that endless debt loop that this cycle keeps them in. So, kind of coming back to the work that we do, we really seek to continue to amplify more and more stories of these farmers and what they experience under this system, and that really helps resonate with farmers who realize that they might be or think that they're alone, and realizing that they are not alone.
Yeah, I imagine a lot of them think they're the ones that are having the problem. I imagine when they talk to the big industrial powers that be, they're being told, well, if you just did this or that, you would be more competitive.
Yeah.
So how did you get involved, Megan? What brought you to transformation?
It's a great question. So I actually previously was a 911 emergency dispatcher, completely different job, but very similar in some ways. I'm located in northeastern Indiana, so it's a rural farming county that I dispatched in, and I did that for about 7 years. And within that, I worked just serving my community and connecting people to the resources that they needed. And that was a really fulfilling role. And so with that, I also was working shift work. And so a lot of the times what you do is you watch a lot of documentaries or things on the internet to keep you awake and just keep you, alert. And I found a lot of different documentaries just about our food system, things I didn't know, things I wasn't aware of. I'm born and raised in Indiana, and we are a commodity crop state. We have corn and soy. And I never really realized what that was being grown for. And a lot of it is grown for feed to feed these animals within the factory farming system. And so I learned a lot about from the health perspectives, from the environmental damage that factory farming causes, and also about the animals in the system. And that really motivated me to care about food systems issues and I somehow stumbled across Transformation and found the work that they were doing. And I thought that that was really hopeful because instead of it really just highlighted again the bravery of what farmers are doing when they speak out, and then also how we can work with them to create a better food system for all of us.
So do you work with farms that are local to you, or do you work virtually, with farms all over?
So we are located within the US, and the majority of our farmers are located in either the Southeast United States. We also are in the Midwest and kind of like the Heartland region, so think Iowa region. We can work anywhere in the United States, but that is also where factory farming is most concentrated, is kind of that Southeast, Midwest, Heartland region. So that's where a lot of the farmers that we work with are. We do have an Indiana farmer in my home state. But yeah, we are all remote and can work with farmers wherever they're located.
So do you swoop in like in a helicopter? You dropped in? How do you get on the ground and see? Because I imagine people are looking at what they've been doing every day for a long period of time. They're almost inured to it. They don't see the possibilities. They need somebody to help them visualize a different future.
Yeah, so a lot of the work that we do again with farmers is amplifying the stories. So we also work to document the farm transitions of the farmers that we work with so that we can show these pathways of what other farmers have done.
Mhm.
And so I'm happy to share a couple of what those kind of look like. The first
Please.
one I'd love to touch on is located in North Carolina. It's the Bowles family farm. This is Paula and Dale Bowles. They were former poultry farmers, and they terminated their contract on their own terms. They converted their chicken barn actually to a greenhouse to grow microgreens, vegetables, and they also do a cut flower operation. They sell their both their produce and their florals to local restaurants and chefs for events. And they're currently working with us to upgrade their existing greenhouse materials just to help increase their efficiency and output. Um, but they're one of the original ones that was really inspired by Craig Watts, and Craig Watts was inspired by them. So again, just going back to amplifying those farmer stories really helps them, connect with each other and realize they're not alone and realize that there are options. Another good example of that is the Fayborg family, which was mentioned in The Guardian. They are located in central Iowa, former hog farmers. They also terminated their contract on their own terms, and they were really driven by the son, Tanner Fayborg, and environmental stewardship. They started with a pilot project just in a shop space on their farm growing mushrooms. And they use those to create some mushroom tinctures, coffee, and hot chocolate. And over the past few years, they've been working with us to convert one of their entire hog barns to help scale their business. They're currently selling through their website and other local collaborations. And one of the really cool things about theirs is, again, kind of going with that environmental stewardship. When farmers have the autonomy, they can take it and run with it. And they work on agroforestry on their land. They have pollinator fields. And one of the most impressive things about their farm transition is they also remediated their former hog lagoon. So the pond that used to hold all of the pig waste is now a swimmable pond, which is very wild to just even consider that what was once holding all that waste you can now swim in. Um, Tied into there's another really cool thing in Iowa is the Standerford family. They are also located in Iowa, and they actually found out about our work through local connections with the Fayborg family and their farm transition. And so that's kind of one of the ways the word spread there locally. They were also former hog farmers, and they exited of their own accord when the farm transitioned from Caroline Standerford from her grandfather down to her and her father. And they really also cited just the economics didn't make sense for them. And they were really driven by wanting to grow their own food and really just sustain their farm for future generations. They're currently working with us on a pilot project growing hydroponic lettuce directly in their hog barn. They also plan to expand into some other hydroponics for both herbs and some fruits, and they want to do high tunnels on the outside of or on their property elsewhere, just so that they can have a wide variety of things that they can grow and offer for their community. And the last one I'll touch on is the one I mentioned earlier in my home state, the Hamiltons. This is Paula and Paul Hamilton. They were former small dairy farmers, and they were actually the ones that were edged out of production. So they had about 100 dairy cows. And when their milk buyer decided they were too small to buy from them anymore, it effectively shut down their farm. They learned about mushroom production and were connected with us through another organization called Farm Aid. And with us, they did a pilot project where they converted their former dairy parlor into a space to grow specialty mushrooms. So they grow oyster mushrooms and lion's mane mushrooms. They experiment with a couple of different other types as well. What's really cool about theirs is they converted their former dairy parlor within the first 3 months of their project and were in full production within the first year and selling at their local farmers market. And I think the end of 2025 was their full second year at the market, which is pretty impressive.
Now, what makes mushrooms a good transition crop? Do you know something about that?
Absolutely. So one of the things, a lot of our farmers are interested in transitioning to mushrooms, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One, they don't take a lot of space to grow. So you can grow in a very, very small space and produce quite a bit of mushrooms. Mushrooms also, so I know earlier I talked to, okay, per chicken, farmers might average about a quarter per chicken. For per pound, farmers can secure anywhere from $16 to $20 a pound. And that might range depending on the mushroom species. But the Hamiltons that I just mentioned in their project that we documented, they were able to secure about $18 a pound for their fresh mushrooms that they were selling, which is more than we had projected with our enterprise budgets and economic estimations.
Wow. So, okay, that's amazing because I imagine some people are thinking, well, where are we going to get our food if all these farmers start to drift off from this process and then grow lettuce, flowers, and mushrooms? But mushrooms are a real food staple and useful all year round, I imagine, compared to maybe lettuce.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Depending if you're growing in a greenhouse, you might be able to grow year round depending on where you're located as well. But yeah, mushrooms you can somewhat grow year round as well. I do know the Hamiltons in the winter kind of dial it down. In the winter in Indiana, we get pretty cold, same in like the Heartland in Iowa. So it might dwindle a little bit down, but for the most part, they can go year round.
All right. Well, so I know you are sitting on so many facts and figures and cool things. Knock them out of the park. Let me know what's something interesting we should really know about the transformation project or what you guys do.
Sure. One of the things I'd love to just touch on is kind of some of the uncomfortable truths that I've learned from working with transformation, and then kind of talk about what you just talked about, and how just farmers transitioning to specialty crop production, how that helps all of us. So the first uncomfortable truth I'd like to start with, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, is just the fact that factory farms are family farms. I don't think a lot of people realize that. It is families who are contracted, indebted, and easily discarded by this system. And we know this because we worked with these farmers firsthand who have raised either tens of thousands of pigs or hundreds of thousands to over 1 million chickens per year. We also know that farmers within the system are impacted by that debt loop and the loss of autonomy. And just something I want to highlight that I think we should all be aware of is that farmers as a whole experience a suicide rate of 3.5 times higher than the general population. And that's something I'm really passionate about as far as farmer mental health, having been a former 911 emergency dispatcher. The second uncomfortable truth I'd like to touch on is just how factory farming pollutes our water sources with waste and how it harms surrounding communities and our public health. So I know I previously touched on some of the waste that is produced as a whole for the US, but I'd like to hone in on a specific state of Iowa. So they actually have the highest number of factory farms or CAFOs. This is namely pig farming. And like I said, we do have two farmers we work with, former pig farmers in Iowa that we work with. Iowa as a state produces the highest amount of animal manure at 109 billion pounds a year. And that is the size, or approximately could fill 20,000 Olympic swimming pools, if that gives you an idea.
Per year.
The Yeah, per year. And the how that ties into just the water and public health is Iowa is in the top 1% in the country for nitrate concentration in their drinking water. And we know that the Polk County Water Quality Report out of Iowa, they covered a lot of what was going on with the water quality crisis in their state, and they found that 80% of the nitrate in their rivers is coming from agricultural sources. So a significant amount. They also cited and talked about how their water treatment facilities struggle to keep up on nitrate removal due to the intensification of agriculture that we're seeing. And this was seen as recently as 2025 in the summer, they had a lawn watering ban just to help offset so that they could keep up with the nitrate removal. I have one more uncomfortable truth I'd love to share as well, and that is just that the majority of animals raised for human consumption in the US are a result of factory farming. I don't know that everybody knows that either. And this is more than about 9.5 billion chickens and 128 million pigs per year. And a
Mm.
really interesting thing from working with some of the farmers that we have, again, we worked with a lot of chicken farmers. They've shared that they wouldn't eat the animals they've raised under these factory farming conditions. And that's due to the amount of sickness and disease the animals experience, which has really left me with, if a farmer wouldn't eat these animals that they raised under factory farming, then why should we?
Yeah. No, that's a poser, isn't it, Megan?
Yeah.
I mean, we laugh to keep from crying sometimes. So that is amazing. What is the future of Transformation Project, and how can normal, everyday citizens be on the, if not specifically help, how can they be adjacent to helping the Transformation Project?
Sure. So I would start with just saying that farm transitions are a pathway for farmers to reclaim their freedom from factory farming. So Transformation's farm transition support, we focus, like we talked about, on fruit, vegetable, green, and specialty mushroom production because it provides the farmer flexibility and autonomy, allowing them to grow and sell what their communities need. So it really helps support those local and regional food systems. And that's where the farmers often begin seeking their support, right? So they're looking at their farmers markets, community supported agricultures, local shops and restaurants. I recently learned about this really cool concept called farm stops, which is kind of a combination or a more permanent version of a farmers market that helps consumers understand where to buy local and helps farmers to sell locally as well. One of the things that people should know as far as how we can support these farmers is that small shifts in consumer habits can make a significant difference for both the farms and for our food system. There was a 2025 Farm and Food Economy report that was done on the state of Nebraska, and it was found that if residents purchased $5 of food weekly from farms within their own state, it would generate $512 million of new farm income for them.
Would you say that one more time? Because I think
Sure.
I need to even process that. Just
I know.
$5. Say that. Start again. Yeah, say it
Absolutely.
again.
So there was a 2025 report on farm and food economy on the state of Nebraska, and it found that if the residents of that state purchased $5 of food weekly from farms located within their state, it would generate $512 million in new farm income.
Mm.
Just goes to show how much of our food is secured outside of our own state, even.
Right. So our food is going to our food dollars are overwhelmingly going to these enormous global uh, behemoth corporations, and we think maybe it's going to our local farmers, but it's really not.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is really a call to get to know your farmer. And another thing I like to point out too, as far as just how we can support these farmers, is again, if they're transitioning to specialty crop production, another thing that we know is the majority of Americans don't eat enough fruits and vegetables or get enough fiber, and that leads to poorer health outcomes. So one of the things I thought I was just like, this is a call or an invitation for all of us to diversify what we eat by eating the rainbow, to purchase adventurous produce, to get curious in the kitchen, and more so than anything, when we're making any sort of diet change or trying to, support more farmers, is seeking progress over perfection, like we talked about earlier.
Yeah, win-win. We need to look
Yeah,
for the wins, how to help with it doesn't have to be perfect to really make a difference. That's really
absolutely.
Megan Hunter. What a wonderful bunch of information you've brought to us today. I'm super happy. I when I planned this episode, I was thinking this is the episode I want. Most of my listeners are pretty vegan or plant-based or vegan adjacent, but I want this to be the one they kind of just send to their cousin, their brother-in-law, their uncle, and just go, "Did you know about this? This is so interesting." So I feel like you've helped us bridge preaching to the choir a little bit, and I'm so excited. I'm going to have all the links and everything to the Transfarmation project in the show notes. And Megan Hunter, is there anything else we need to know before I let you go and go save some more farms?
I would love to share how people can get involved with transformation. So
Please.
any farmers or anybody who wants to be an ally and is interested in getting involved in our work, maybe you have skills you want to offer to support farmers or just our program. If you want to go to our website at thetransformationproject.org to our Get Involved page, you can fill out our website contact form, and we monitor that. And that is something that can help you get involved there. If you want to sign up for our newsletter and then also follow us on social media, those are other great ways to stay informed. And just in general, one of the things I love about our work is that transformation is an opportunity for us all to invest in a more just and resilient food system.
I'm going to give you the last words, Megan. Thank you so much for joining us on Veg Your Best.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So, what did you think about Megan Hunter and the Transfarmation Project? One of the things I hope stays with you from this conversation is that factory farming is not only a story about animals. Although it is certainly that, it is also a story about the exploitation and indebtedness of farm families and how vertical contract farming models have exploited human beings. It's about lost autonomy and pollution and rural communities absorbing the waste, and about families trying to figure out whether the next generation can even stay on the land without inheriting the same trap. It's also a story about imagination and thinking outside the box, right? The alternatives seem completely overwhelming, but they are not abstract. Megan talked about farmers converting former hog barns and chicken barns and dairy spaces into places that could grow mushrooms or lettuces or microgreens or flowers or herbs or other items, food, products directly for human beings to consume. That matters. It matters for farmers. It matters for communities. It matters for the sustainability of our country. And especially this week, heading into Earth Day, it matters for the kind of food systems we are willing to keep calling normal. You know, a takeaway that I loved from this conversation is that support does not have to begin with perfection. It can begin with curiosity. And we can get to know our local farmers. We can buy something grown closer to home. We can try to support new initiatives by our local farmers, using something new in the kitchen, eating a wider range of plants, and just starting to pay closer attention to where our food comes from and who's carrying the real cost of producing it. So if this episode has helped you think about factory farming in any different way at all, in terms of the toll that it takes, especially on the human side of it, which sometimes we forget, please do share this episode with one person who might not normally listen to a vegan podcast. You know, this is exactly the kind of conversation that can open a door. And this Earth Day, this month, that's the way to veg your best. Veg Your Best podcast production, music, and editing by Charlie Weinshank. Thanks, Charlie. Before you go, it would mean so much to me and the Veg Your Best team if you would hit subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, or share with someone you think might be interested. Something about algorithms, it helps bump us up a little in the rankings, and that's the best way to help others find the podcast and for us to find our audience. So, until next week, make it easy and veg your best.